Melbourne, Melbourne, Melbourne,
I'm Damion Brown from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm going to talk about philosophers with laptops. I'm going to start by taking you back to the 1990s, 20-ish years ago. During the 1990s, heady time, we had the X-Files, we had new genres of dance music being discovered all the time, tremendously exciting. We weren't sure whether planes were going to drop out of the sky and the world would end with Y2K. And during the 1990s, I was studying philosophy at the University of Southampton in the UK. Quick show of hands, anybody studied philosophy in any sort of capacity at all? Yeah? Any other? Like even if it's just like at high school or something, or at uni? Okay. All right. If the person next to you had their hand up, you may want to listen to what they have to say, because they know more than I do. Like, I know basically nothing about philosophy. I think I knew slightly more coming out of a 3-year degree than I did going in, but that's kind of not the point. Where we sort of kind of found ourselves is there's no kind of career trajectory for philosophers. Like, why are you studying philosophy? And all these kind of vocational, useful things that my friends were studying, with things like engineering and computing and like maths and zoology. They used to kind of take the piss of it, that there's nothing you can really do with a philosophy degree. They used to make this joke all the time, which was, why doesn't a philosophy student look out the window in the morning? Does anyone know the answer? It's because if they looked out the window in the morning, you'd have nothing to do in the afternoon. So, like, pace yourself, right? So we were thinking, all right, I had to kind of put up with this kind of shit for a while. And what I've been recently thinking is it's not philosophy's fault or philosophy's problem. The problem is that there was no career path, because we had to wait for web analytics to kind of be invented. We had to wait for that collision of technology and thinking and stuff. And now suddenly we've got a career path for philosophers. If you're thinking this is tenuous and a bit thin, a bit flimsy, you're exactly right. Trust me when I say it's going to get way more tenuous as we go through. Trust me. So what are we talking about? Philosophy is defined as the love of knowledge. It comes from philo, comes from sophos. And that idea as well of philosophy is the knowledge about knowledge when you're studying it. We talk about web analytics as being, the pursuit of what's true, like what's going on, what's actually happening. And I think analysts are kind of going in and finding knowledge, taking it out to other places within an organization and saying, yeah, now I'm telling you know what's going on, right? You now know what's happening. I found this as well on Wikipedia. Philosophy aims to find the nature of truth and knowledge, there it is again, as well as life's value and importance. So along with knowledge, we've got this truth, idea of truth. And how many times do you hear about web analytics tools being referred to as a source of truth? We need a source of truth for our numbers. Philosophically, that's an interesting concept. And this thing about life's value and importance as well. We're not looking at life's value and importance, maybe we're looking at sort of ideas around what's valuable and important for our companies and our clients. And I like this as well. Stemming from wonder, curiosity, and the desire to know and understand, philosophy is a form of structured inquiry. It kind of starts with this like, wow, what's going on? Like, what's happening? What's everything mean? And then it's the application of structured stuff and processes to take you to an endpoint. Sounding a bit relevant to analytics yet? Not at all. Bear with me, but what I'm going to try and prove and try and sort of come up with is the idea that from ancient philosophy and through the history of philosophy, we then somehow end up at something which is approaching and approximating web analytics, and what can we do with that? So what I'd like to do is to start with an extremely selective history of philosophy, with apologies to my learned colleagues who've studied more deeply this than I have. I'd like to begin with Pythagoras from 570 to 480 BC. BC apparently stands for Bitcoin. Never knew that. Pythagoras said, the ultimate nature of reality is number. Like, he's like a fundamentalist about numbers. So maybe that makes him the first data scientist. Maybe. He also refused to eat beans. Maybe he's a data scientist again, because the data scientists we know are a bit weird, maybe. Don't like beans. He also is known for this, the right angle triangle thing. Anyone know what this what this is? It's it sounds plausible. I will go along with that. He was into this idea about deductive reasoning, which is when you take two self-evident statements and move to a non-self-evident conclusion, taking two things that we know and then moving forward to something that we can then sort of assume is knowledge and is correct. Example, if it is not raining in Melbourne at the moment, if it's not raining there right now, which we can figure out by calling someone or looking at radar maps, if it's not raining right now, Percy won't be carrying an umbrella, right? We know that's true. Percy doesn't carry an umbrella unless it's raining. Therefore, right now we could say that Percy is not going to be carrying an umbrella. We've taken two things that we do know and mashed them together and taken something that we do know. In web analytics, how many times do you get stuff like this? We say, well, actually, right now our cross-domain tracking is broken. We know that if our cross-domain tracking is broken, we can't report effectively on conversions. Therefore, I haven't got any numbers for you today. Problem, but philosophically determined. The second one is Socrates, 470 to 399 BC. He's actually unique in that he's one of the only, in fact the only, ancient philosopher of whom photographic evidence exists. I looked this up on the internet, it's true. He actually, we know what he looked like. He said the unexamined life is not worth living, which is kind of the whole point of web analytics, right? What's the point in doing anything in terms of marketing or comms or any of those things without measuring? It's kind of the whole point. And I'm sure we've all got those kind of experiences about clients that might throw their analytics tool on the website and think, yep, done. It's done, it's tracking, it's fine. If they're not doing anything with it, they're not examining it, it's not worth living, not worth doing. He was into this idea of logical reasoning. So he hated what was called sophism. And sophism was a kind of like I guess, we'd say it's like a bit like early self-help. You might go and pay a bit of money to somebody and they might say, the true secret of life is not to be a dick. And then you might go, oh, great, yeah, that was really valuable, I'll try and do that. He didn't think that was such a good way of doing things. He preferred actually thinking about things rather than just going with the accepted wisdom. So the accepted wisdom could be things like, if we always assume that Facebook is where our audience is, or that the A/B tests we've always done are probably still current, if we think about those things and kind of logically work through whether it maybe is not what we expect, we can kind of get somewhere. And we're doing that a lot with analytics as well, I think. Plato's awesome. This is his main thing. Anyone familiar with the allegory of the caves? Yes. So what's going on here is that you've got these dudes who are in a cave and they're looking at what they think is reality. They think that is what the world is. But we can see there are these kind of freaky-looking fellas who are moving things around, and there's fire projecting those shadows onto the wall. And the true nature of reality is up here, like enlightenment and freedom and wow. And the whole idea is that it's the philosopher's job to instruct and to guide people who are stuck here, like us, everybody, thinking that reality is what's going on in front of their face, and then saying, actually, it's kind of further up here. Reality is like a liberation away from those things. This is kind of like where, what are they? The Wachowski brothers with Matrix kind of did this. And Carl Sagan has done some really interesting kind of research and writing that says that chances are in the cosmos this probably is what's going on. I'd advise not overthinking that. If you thought GDPR was scary, this is way fucking scarier. But I think there's an analog here for analytics, because you can imagine situations where somebody might think that what they're looking at in their reports means one thing, but it actually means something completely different. I once sat down with a small business that was telling me they're sort of making, it's chronic, it just tells itself, doesn't it? But they were sort of making cosmetics and bringing orders for organic cosmetics because they were telling me everyone's searching for organic. And I was like, well, makes sense, big thing, organic. Show me the report, and they showed me that, Google/organic, and seriously making like big, business decisions based on this. In those circumstances, you might decide to, rather than guide them out of the cave, kind of fill it in, seal it, put a car park on top for safe measure. But, when you think about things like, terminology of certain web analytics tools, they might change what users means, for instance. And maybe they don't communicate that very well or very effectively through help centers and such. So it's part of the problem. And Plato had this idea as well about the Philosopher King. He, as a philosopher, said, I should be king, effectively. Thought that the world would be a great place if you put philosophers in charge. And that's kind of familiar to, organizations want to be data-driven. We've got a new COO. She's very data-driven. All those kind of things that you hear. Maybe it's not a great thing. Here we've got, my lord, the Persian army is approaching. We have to marshal our defenses. And the Philosopher King is saying, army, is there even such a thing as an army? Yes, and it's heading this way, right? So it would not work. Would not work in the real world. Taking a jump of several centuries now, to William of Ockham, he said, entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity, which means given two theories that equally explain the data, one should choose the theory that posits the minimum number of entities. Or, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. That's something which is a bit more familiar. And actually, by simplifying it, you can make it sound a bit more sort of relevant and understandable. It's where Avinash gets his blog title from, Occam's Razor, also explained by Lisa Simpson to Homer Simpson at some point. But this is an interesting one as well. Like you might think, this is if someone's looking at their Google organic search and they think, oh, geez, there must have been an algorithm change because our organic traffic has just dropped off a cliff. Shit, Google's done a panda and a penguin and combined the two together into some hideous animal that's taking our business away. Is it that, or is it that you started bidding on your company name on AdWords? You're kind of cannibalizing traffic away from organic. Yeah, maybe Google's done a big, scary update, but if it's maybe more likely that this is happening instead, Occam's Razor, we're doing it. And this is something that people that work generally in marketing would maybe struggle with, and it's the analyst's job to kind of say, you know what? This is what's happening. It's not what you think, not what you fear. I think as well that William of Ockham, were he with us today, would be a really good data visualization guy, because he would know not to put everything in a dashboard. What do you want in your dashboard? Everything? No. He would say, I'll show you this. We'll have like a progress against the target, just some metrics so we can see what's important and how we're going. Like that kind of drilling things down and using something like Data Studio, which this is done in, to just tell a simple story well. Thomas More is next. He is most well known for Utopia. Anyone heard of Utopia, the book? Anyone read it? Thought not. No, I haven't either. It's a great prologue. I can recommend the prologue. But it's this idea of a magical land where there's no personal property. You imagine no possessions. It's easy if you try. But this idea that Utopia is this kind of wonderful world, this like magical land where amazing things will happen. And this idea, it's like it's a something. And I think analytics has got this at its heart. Even something like the analytics maturity model by Stefan Hamill. This is all based on the idea that there is a utopian perfect edge of the web on everything, right? A perfect score. Bowling a perfect whatever it is. It's this idea that there's got to be better. And I think that's something which is in the middle of web analytics. Like you have to kind of believe that there's a better out there. I think we're ambassadors for utopia is a bit silly. Maybe when everyone kind of thinks that call themselves a growth hacker isn't bullshitty enough and they move to this, we'll start seeing people calling themselves ambassador for utopia on their LinkedIn profile. Also in utopia, nobody works more than 6 hours a day. All right, now we're kind of getting somewhere. This is kind of what we would all probably want to sort of see eventually. This guy, Francis Bacon, he said the repetitive occurrence of an incident does not guarantee that the same thing will happen again. This is usually illustrated by things like this. A bag of marbles, and if you pull out 9 marbles that are all blue, each one's blue, you expect the next one to be blue as well. But that's not possible. It's possible, but it's not necessarily evident. It's not a property of the world that the next one of those marbles is going to be blue. It's an expectation, and it is making the point that the human mind is very good at layering those expectations together, but to its detriment, to its fault. Instead of looking for positives that confirm a hypothesis, we should look for negatives that disprove that hypothesis. So stuff like this, like we're looking for an analytics tool to kind of back things up a lot of the time. Looks like Facebook's where our traffic is converting from best. Let me just compare that with a few other traffic sources. Yeah, cool, done. but maybe you might want to look at segments of Facebook traffic or certain audiences that are not converting best. Maybe see if there's something sort of hidden within that. This is all like familiar stuff. You don't have to corroborate everything all the time. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, one of my favorites. I'll tell you for why. He was always ill when he was a kid, very, very sickly child, and would often stay in bed until midday. And he had most of his ideas in this kind of state, like kind of waking up late. So when he was better, he decided he would still stay in bed until midday, because that's where he figured he does most of his philosophizing. You know, some web analysts who are a bit like that, maybe. Also, toward the end of his career, he was being paid by the King of Spain to just kind of sit there and come up with interesting ideas. That's just what an analyst does. The King of Spain says, you know, you hang out in your smoking jacket, sit by the fire, bang a few cigars, whatever, and tell me something interesting every now and again. That's what an analytics agency may do sometimes as well. So the parallels, I'm struggling, but there are parallels, right? But Descartes sort of started with this idea of saying, well, what's real? Like, how do we kind of know what's real out there in the world? And he was interested in stuff like this, that this looks like it's broken when the straw is in the water. It's actually not broken. It's a scientific process called...
refraction.
Thank you, refraction. And he thought, well, hang on a sec, but I experience the world through my eyes. My eyes can deceive me. It's not a good idea to trust a friend if that person has deceived me. So should I really trust my senses? Like, is that real? Is that really what's going on? In web analytics, like, just as your sense organs have deceived you in the past, you shouldn't trust the implementation. Like when you're coming in and seeing, you know, we've got 1% bounce rate. You wouldn't trust that. You would always kind of look away from it because you've seen before. That can be a bit fishy, a bit funky stuff going on. Finding a second source of numbers to back up and corroborate is a good idea. After this, Descartes went to have a look and see, well, all right, so if I can't trust my senses, maybe I'll trust things that I think I know that I don't pick up through my senses. So things like 2 + 3 = 5. Like, you don't learn that by smelling it or hearing it. You kind of conceptualize it in your head. Or the concept that a father is always going to be older than his son. All right, that's kind of in your head somewhere. And then he thought, maybe we can't trust that because maybe, this is him by the way, maybe there's like a demonic evil spirit going around and making us all believe and all think that 2 + 3 = 5. And we're having a kind of a group shared hallucination. A group shared hallucination that these things are true. And I think there's a bit of analogy in that because you get people that think that Facebook are fudging their own numbers to make Facebook look good. DoubleClick are doing the same as well. I've even heard somebody say that they're convinced that one of their websites had an SEO penalty years ago, and then all of his other websites had an SEO penalty. They weren't linked, no hyperlink from one to the other, but it was the same analytics account he used to log in, and he was convinced that Google was doing this, and I think probably not. They probably just had a shitty bunch of websites or something. There's that idea of what's out there, though. This guy, John Locke, is cool, best known for an essay concerning human understanding, which he defined understanding as the way in which the human mind collects, organizes, classifies, and ultimately makes judgments based on sense data. So this idea of sense data, like these little kind of pings of information that you see and smell and hear and kind of come in, and then understanding is that kind of breaking it down, turning it into something that we can work with. And I think, this is the most tenuous one by the way, I think what he was really doing here was the first solutions design document. Right, the web analytics tool is collecting hits, and then you need them to kind of pick up a taxonomy and a structure and a way for understanding what that information really is, to do something with it. I warned you this was going to be flimsy. Friedrich Nietzsche here in a projected form, he said, amongst the conditions of life, error might be one. I think he'd be doing a TED talk if he was kind of like around now, right? It's like embracing error. And I think there's something that analytics does that's different to how error and failure is perceived by Silicon Valley and business and those kind of things. Like, it's a big deal now, right? So if you fail, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. You kind of pick up and move on. You have two guys having a conversation in San Francisco, and one says, how's your startup going? He says, it's failed. And the first guy goes, congratulations, right? That's kind of what we kind of embrace now. In web analytics, though, we kind of embrace them in a different way. We actually go looking for error. We go looking for mistakes in judgment, mistakes in implementation, mistakes in the way that data is kind of like being consumed. So it's kind of fundamental to what we do. If there were no errors, there'd be no web analytics industry, which is kind of scary. Is there another career that would tolerate failure so absolutely readily? Like if you can go into a new job or a new client engagement and you find like 10 errors by lunchtime, you're a hero. Like that's a really, really cool thing. And then finally this guy, Ludwig Wittgenstein. See if this sounds familiar before I get into it. Those who knew him assumed he was either a madman or a genius. Does that describe you? Or you're a data scientist? Or how about this one? He was known for working himself up into fits of frustration, pacing about the room, decrying his own stupidity. No, a lot of people like this. It's fine, it's good, we're all the same. We're all the same. So Wittgenstein's kind of big idea, I guess, is this idea that language isn't something that exists in the world. It's not a property of the universe. What language is a bunch of kind of agreed conventions and this kind of sort of mesh network that everyone kind of buys into in order to get on with life. Like, you know that means up, and that means down, and if you nod, that means yes, or something affirmative. We communicate based on what these kind of agreed models are, and I think that's a bit like attribution modeling. A bit like an attribution model. You kind of, there it is, you agree on something and say, right, this isn't true, right? This isn't accurate, this isn't 100% where it is, but we can just agree on it and do some reporting and kind of get on with our lives. So we're there, all right? Each of these guys has kind of given something which has got a component to what we do in web analytics. Maybe, just maybe, that whole thing about studying philosophy was not useless. Maybe it just needed the right kind of industry and the right practice in order to become useful. It's an interesting idea. So have we found a use for a philosophy major? Maybe. Maybe. Philosophy students are looking for consistency. It's like kind of poking holes in other people's arguments and looking for inconsistencies. Very important in web analytics. They're also doing a lot of reasoning without really knowing it. They're kind of comparing competing hypotheses and looking at sort of arguments for and against certain tests and certain things. They're also open to new ideas and to new thinking. How often do you see this in a job description? It's like, you must be open to new ideas. Oh, that's me out, you know. Change is for the young, right? But this is like this is what philosophy teaches people to do. Crucially as well, I think that philosophy majors would have vastly lower salary expectations than data majors. So maybe this could work, or maybe it wouldn't. This is something which is a bit disappointing. I found this on this particular blog, so switchsplinters.blogspot.com. He's done some research which is showing that the number of philosophy majors in the States is actually falling. There was a bit of an uptick here when probably people were thinking, you know, oh shit, it's the end of the millennium. What does it all mean? I need some answers in my life. And then it kind of goes down after the sort of 2010 sort of cliff edge. I'm not sure what could have caused that. He done some initial analysis as well, which sort of normalizes for this 2010 cliff edge. Philosophy is like the big red one. And then he's sort of showing that other people are doing things, what are they, like architecture, business marketing, communications, computer science, basically useless bullshit, right? So that's what people are studying instead. So maybe it's not so hard to find that ideal philosophy major, but I'm going to try. As of today, if you're located in Melbourne and you type in job for a philosophy graduate or job for a philosophy major, you'll see this ad, which is taking you to this landing page, which I can tell you in one day has had 0 impressions and 0 clicks. And we're just going to see if we can find one. And if we do, I'll kind of update the story because I think this is quite exciting. So this is my final point, I guess. You're all philosophers. You didn't necessarily know it, but when you've been working on your own data sets and your own client data sets, you're doing this kind of reasoning and kind of critical thinking and stacking things and looking at things in good and groovy ways. It's pretty cool. There is, I believe, some stuff into it. There's stuff in this. It's not a complete ramblings of a madman, I hope. I think there's a lineage here. And if we kind of like circle back to that initial sort of definition we were looking at that was saying stemming from the wonder, the curiosity and the desire to know and understand, those three qualities, wonder, curiosity and the desire to know and understand, I think are all us. Like we've all got that. Even if we're kind of old and jaded, we used to have that, right? But we all had that, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't. And that's my final point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damion.